Bose now proceeded to Singapore. He received a hero's welcome by thousands of Indian volunteers, members of the Indian National Army under Japanese command. They were ready to fight the British, but had lacked a charismatic Indian leader.
Netaji reached there, my dream was realized, and I was quite sure that Netaji will get India freedom. And our whole army, there were more than 50,000 Indians. We were ready to sacrifice ourselves, but get India independent.
Bose told his followers that together with the Japanese, an attack on British India had every chance of success.
Subhash Bose said, as soon as we get into India, hundreds of thousands of people will rise up and fight against the British. Some truly believed in what Subhash Bose was preaching, which is, we are now going to fight for our own freedom. Why should we fight for the victories of the British Empire? Let's fight for Indian freedom. And that's what he persuaded some of them to do. One of the unique features of the Indian National Army was that there was a women's regiment. They were trained to fight, they were given small arms training, and many of them were teenage girls, recruited from the Indian population in Southeast Asia. There were 3 million Indians in Southeast Asia. These young women, he felt as if they were his adopted daughters. He called them the Ranis, the Rani of Jhansi Regiment, after this princess, the Rani of Jhansi.
One of the women officers in the INA was Lakshmi Sehgal. A trained medical doctor, she still runs a hospital in Calcutta.
My daughter. He said, but I'm a very, people may think I'm a cruel man. I'm still not satisfied. I want women also to join the regiment and form a regiment of their own, because they form half the population, and unless they also fight for the freedom of the country, they can't expect to get their rights after freedom. So women also must join.
At the beginning of 1944, the Indian National Army joined the Japanese advance towards India.
The Japanese generals and officers had a lot of respect for Bose. And some of them said to me privately, there is no person in the war who more fully fit the ideal of a samurai than Subhash Chandra Bose.
Subhash Chandra Bose was actually desperate somehow to get into Bengal, perhaps reach Calcutta, because he felt that then there would be, in fact, be a big civilian uprising in India. And his Indian National Army was simply meant to be a catalyst for a much larger civilian uprising inside the country.
In March 1944, Japanese and INA forces went on the offensive. The Japanese expected an easy victory, just like in 1942. But this time, the British were ahead of the game.
The Japanese had one of their worst defeats in the war, and the Indian National Army, recreated by Subhash Bose from the original Indian National Army, was just massacred.
Newly released documents show that a double agent, codenamed Silver, had given the British advance knowledge of the Japanese attack. His real name was Bhagat Ram Talwar. An insider, he'd received the information from the unsuspecting Netaji himself. Bose had believed that the Indian troops fighting for the British would surrender to the advancing INA, Instead, it was Bose's forces who were surrendering to the Allies.
There are defeats on the road to victory. That this is a big setback, but the cause of Indian freedom continues in some other way. I think that he understands that this is going to have a propaganda effect in India.
After the war, the British would put 3 generals of the Indian National Army on trial in the Red Fort in Delhi.
One was a Muslim, Shah Nawaz Khan. Another was a Hindu, P.K. Saigal. And another was a Sikh, Guru Baksh Singh Dhillon. Suddenly there was this Muslim, Sikh, all together in it.
The INA trial would cause a nationwide outcry.
The political miscalculation by the British is so enormous to give publicity to the actions which Indians are going to see as patriotic, to give them enormous publicity, just a stupefying mistake by the British and General Auchinleck. Anyway, they're put on trial, they're convicted, treason against the king, emperor, they're sentenced to transportation for life, that is life imprisonment, and then they're released. I mean, the demonstrations in India on behalf of the Indian National Army and the knowledge that was coming out about the struggle of this army of Subhash Bose to fight with the Japanese for the liberation from the British Empire gets out after the war, and they're now considered heroes and martyrs.
But even a non-violent struggle demands an army, an organization, and a machinery.
12 months before the trials, on the 18th of August 1945, 3 days after Japan's surrender to the Allies, Bose was still full of confidence about his political future. He decided to fly to Manchuria and surrender to the forces of the Soviet Union and continue his struggle for Indian independence.
I think Subhash would have gotten fantastic admiration after independence, and I think he could have been a cabinet minister, he could have been a leader of a very important opposition socialist party, but he would have had a very important role to play. He was a relatively young man, he was 48 years old.
But the plane was overloaded. After a stopover in Japanese-occupied Formosa, it developed engine trouble. According to witnesses, the plane crashed. Bose died as a result of severe burns. He was cremated, and his remains were sent to a Buddhist temple in Japan, where they're still kept today.
The first was a shock. After all, when you suddenly hear the news of the death of a very near one, you are shocked. You are deeply grieved.
News of Bose's death was broadcast around the world. Eventually, it reached his widow, Emilia, in Vienna.
After she got the news of my father's death, she was really devastated, evidently. She said that I really wanted to end life, but it's my child that caused me to cling. So I think it was a very difficult thing, but she was rather strong in the sense of sort of dealing with it and also not constantly complaining about it.
But not everyone believed that the Netaji died in 1945. Some suggested that he'd made it to the Soviet Union, where he was locked up in a labor camp. Others believed Bose escaped altogether.
When we heard about the plane crash and he died, we who knew that this sort of fake news has been has been broadcasted many times. And this may be one of the trick.
Even today, the question of Bose's death or disappearance in 1945 divides the people of India. Recently, an official commission appointed by the Indian government presented the findings of a 6-year investigation into Bose's death. Chaired by a former High Court judge, the Mukherjee Commission's findings shocked the nation.
He was such a beloved leader of the country, the people must know about what happened ultimately. My findings are, so to speak, is partial, in the sense that I have only said the earlier findings of his death is not correct, the ashes are not his.
The Commission's findings are highly sensitive. If Bose didn't die in the plane crash, why did he never reappear in public? He could have played a major role before and after Indian independence in 1947. According to the most popular conspiracy theory, India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, knew that Bose hadn't died in a plane crash.
Some elements are that Bose was in a Soviet prison and he lived there for decades even, and Nehru did everything to convince Stalin that Bose should stay in that prison, not be allowed to come back. It was in Nehru's interest that Bose did not reappear in independent India. It must be Nehru's doing. There is no proof for that, but it's interesting that these conspiracy theories, even when in 1997 there was Bose's 100th birthday, still some conspiracy theories were very much alive.
Anita Pfaff has always believed in the official version of events. She's also argued that a DNA test of Bose's remains is unnecessary. She's now changed her mind on the test.
As a consequence of the report of the last inquiry commission, I have written to the priest of Renkochi temple asking him to agree to providing bone samples for a DNA test. What I've heard is that he would want to have an okay of the Indian and the Japanese government, and I hope we will eventually get the government to stop dilly-dallying and agree to having this test done and then see what the results are.
Subhash Chandra Bose, India's most controversial nationalist. Wooed by both pacifists and generals, he was prepared to shake hands with the devil in pursuit of his dreams. 6 decades after his death or disappearance, Bose still has the power to electrify the nation.
My father was always a mystery man, it seems, and he has left us with a couple of mysteries which stay with us, and the circumstances of his death are certainly one important issue.
Netadi, Netadi.